Wellness for Life is brought to you by Back in Motion Physical Therapy, Gothenburg Chiropractic Clinic, Mahabi Atwa Community Action Partnership, Natural Alternatives, and Lakeside Sports and Pain Clinic.
Hi there, I'm Matthew Koffenberg. I'm a physical therapist and I own Back in Motion Physical Therapy in Perham as well as Park Rapids, Minnesota. You know, it's May, golf courses are starting to open up, people are getting out there and playing some golf. So I thought today I'd talk a little bit about injury and golf. You know, the low back, the shoulder, the knee, those are common areas for golfers to have some injury. And particularly in Minnesota, when the golf season is so compressed, one injury can lead to a loss of 40 to 60% of your golf season. So you want to be thinking about some things that maybe you can do to prevent some injury, or at least kind of have an idea of why an injury might occur. So I thought I'd spend some time today and talk about that. Most golf injuries, the majority of golf injuries are going to really be due to overuse. Particularly at the beginning of a season, people are excited to get out and play some golf, so they'll go out and they'll just play too much golf. So we call that an overuse injury. We're doing too much of something, and that ultimately can lead to injury. Another thing to be thinking about as you start to golf is a warm-up. If you don't warm up, you actually double your risk of injury. And a warm-up, really all you have to do is about 10 to 15 minutes of a simple warm-up before you go out and shoot your round. That could be as simple as going to the driving range, starting with some smaller clubs and just doing some real light strokes, eventually getting a little bit more aggressive with your strokes. But you really should do 10 to 15 minutes of a warm-up before you shoot your round. If you can do that, you do significantly reduce your risk of injury. The other thing that often leads to injury is just faulty swing mechanics. And faulty swing mechanics usually have something to do with your own personal body, where a particular joint just isn't mobile enough to allow you to have a good, proper swing. And so there are certainly things that we can do as therapists to kind of evaluate people to see if their joints are moving properly to ensure a reduction of potential golf injury. So I thought I'd talk about the low back, the shoulder, and the knee today, and just talk about some components of why the back might get injured or why the shoulder might get injured. So the most common golf injury is going to be the low back. The low back, when we go out onto the golf course and do a swing, you actually increase the compression load on the back by 8 times. So it's a significant amount of load being placed on the low back. So with the low back, there are usually about 3 things that can lead to low back injury. One is a little bit of weakness in the hip. Another is a loss of motion in the thoracic spine. So our thoracic spine basically runs from here to here. When we talk about low back, we're talking about the lumbar spine, but a loss of motion in the thoracic spine can actually lead to low back injury. The other thing is a loss of motion in your hip, whether it's your left hip or your right hip. So when we talk about golf, we mainly are working in 2 planes of movement. We're working in what's called the frontal plane, which is basically this plane, and we work in the rotational plane. So most injuries are going to occur because of lack of mobility in either of those planes. Now, with the low back, we have to control this frontal plane movement with strength in the hips. If our hips cannot control this movement, so when we're swinging, our hips should really be moving a lot in this lateral plane. So when we're doing our golf swing, our hips have to control that. If they're not controlling that, that can put excessive force on our low back. The thoracic spine. When we're doing our swing, we have to have a lot of mobility in the thoracic spine. If we don't have mobility in the thoracic spine, we're going to increase, because we want to get back there. It's either going to come from the thoracic spine or the lumbar spine. And if we don't have mobility here, we're going to have too much excessive mobility in the lumbar spine. The other thing is our hip. When we're doing our swing, this hip has to be able to rotate. If it doesn't have enough mobility, guess what? The back's going to take more compressive force. The shoulder, very similar. The shoulder, when we're doing our swing, as I come back, my thoracic spine really has to rotate a lot. If it doesn't, I still want to get that backswing, so I've got to find it somehow. A lot of times what will happen is I'll reach too far with my shoulder. So a loss of mobility in the back of the shoulder can lead to shoulder injuries. And then with the knee, we have to have mobility at the ankle, and we have to have mobility at the hip so that the knee does not get injured. Again, when I'm taking my backswing, my hip has to rotate in. If it doesn't rotate in, my knee is going to really fall into what's called valgus, really going to put a ton of stress on that knee if my hip can't rotate. The same way as my ankle, I'm going to exaggerate this, but my ankle has to be able to rotate into what we call an everted position. If it cannot move, more force is going to be placed on the knee. So with that swing, thoracic mobility, hip mobility, and ankle mobility are key to making sure that my back, my shoulder, and my knee don't take too much force. So there are some very simple exercises that you can do to improve that mobility. If you're interested in having we can actually do a swing mechanical assessment or a full body assessment to see if you're ready to go out and swing. Thanks so much. Give me a call, 218-346-2464.
Thank you for watching Wellness for Life. Brought to you by Back in Motion Physical Therapy, Koffenberg Chiropractic Clinic, Mahabi Atwa Community Action Partnership, Natural Alternatives, and Lakeside Sports and Pain Clinic.